This video is about the principles of non-violence as used by Martin Luther King. It's sort of turned into a video of two halves. The first half about my half-hearted efforts to use it with mixed results. The second half is much better. It's got some beautiful singing, it's got some great ideas, powerfully written, examples of extraordinary human behaviour. If you want to jump ahead to that part, I'll put the time code in the video description. So, first of all, my efforts. About 4 years ago, I was the coordinator of the SpeedWatch group in my town. And SpeedWatch is where the police get members of the public to stand at the side of the road with a speed indication device. We would write down the details of speeding vehicles and the police would write to the registered keepers. It's all about education. You don't get points or a fine or anything like that. And when the police got us organised, they gave us a card and it said quite clearly they expect it to reduce speeding to the posted speed limit, and it would improve the quality of life for the people in the town. So if you're a cycle campaigner, you want to make it easy to cycle, you want to reduce carbon emissions, it seems like a good thing to do, doesn't it? And you think, well, what has this got to do with Martin Luther King? Well, have a look at this front page of the newspaper. There I am. It sounds very positive, but that's because I wrote the press release and then the newspaper printed it pretty much word for word. Not all drivers like having their details recorded and being written to by the police. So I put in the article, for those people who don't support us, it's important that we win their understanding. We're against speeding, not the people who do it. You recognise that from anywhere? Here's something that Martin Luther King wrote from Birmingham jail. Non-violence isn't about defeating or humiliating the opponent, it's about winning their friendship and understanding. And a bit further on he wrote, we're against oppression, not the oppressor. In the same way as we weren't against the people doing the speeding, we were against what they were doing. You might be asking yourself, why are white, middle-aged, middle-class people in Britain using the principles of Martin Luther King? Surely you know, we're part of the establishment, we're police support volunteers, supported by the town council. And also, why aren't the police enforcing the speed limit? In short, what on earth is going on? The police weren't interested in speeding because it wasn't a priority for the government. The government sets the objectives for the police. The police are accountable to the public. In this way, a police force, it seems to me, is a political organisation rather than a scientific one. Obviously, the only way to be happy is Stoicism. But Stoicism is all about accepting the world how it is, having a peaceful mind, being of like-minded people, avoiding the crowd who are never a good judge of anything. If you want to do something about speeding in a country where speeding is endemic, you need to change society. If you need to change society, you need Martin Luther King, and here is how he did it. The goal of the demonstrations was to dramatise the existence of injustice and to bring about the presence of justice by methods of non-violence. Long years of experience indicated to us that Negroes could achieve this goal when four things occurred. Number one, non-violent demonstrators go into the streets to exercise their constitutional rights. Number two, racists resist by unleashing violence against them. Number three, Americans of good conscience, in the name of decency, demand federal intervention and legislation. And number four, the administration, under mass pressure, initiates measures of immediate intervention and supports remedial legislation. The great majority of decent American people were shocked at how Martin Luther King's supporters were treated, and they got the government to do something about it. When African Americans went into, for example, a whites-only lunch counter and got beaten up, that wasn't an accident, that was an important part of the process. That's what they expected to happen. The problem was, after about a year, it became obvious we weren't having any effect at all. So it sort of became a protest, you know, standing up in public for something you feel strongly about. We did try and win the friendship and understanding of the awkward drivers, you know, that small group of people who refused to slow down, refused even to make a token effort. But it was quite hard work, to say the least. So the problem group we identified, you know, in the same way as Martin Luther King smoked out the racists, the groups of people we smoked out were, number one, 30 mile an hour speed limit. The big groups of people we smoked out was, number one, dangerous drivers who refused to even make a token effort to slow down. Number 2, the police. When we reported the dangerous drivers, those ones who stood out as being a real problem, the police did nothing. We couldn't get the police interested in speeding, and that seemed to me to be part of the problem. Martin Luther King had the same issue. Over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. The Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice. Martin Luther King thought the racists were allowed to get away with treating black people badly because the white moderates let them get away with it. I thought people were able to speed so much because the police let them get away with it. I was so desperate to get the police to react in some way against the dangerous drivers that I even took a leaf out of Martin Luther King's book when it came to putting yourselves in physical danger, so the bad people beat you up, and organised a SpeedWatch session on a road on the way towards the town centre where I knew young men would be walking on Friday evenings to go to the pubs. And I thought, if we do a session then, they might get into an argument with us, they might beat us up. I thought the police would have to respond then. We didn't get beaten up, which is a shame. I thought later on, I should have really warned the other volunteers what the plan was, but it didn't seem relevant at the time. Still, their sacrifice wouldn't have been in vain. When the police said SpeedWatch is educational, I think they had in mind it was the public who needed to be educated, but I decided it was the police. And even the most basic things took quite a lot of hard work to get the police to accept. So, for example, the idea that the speed limit should be enforced, taking into account the needs of people who walk and cycle, rather than just the needs of people who drive. The idea that speeding is a criminal offence. Even when the police accepted it is a criminal offence, although it's not a recordable criminal offence, in the end they accepted it was a criminal offence. They said, don't tell the public, they won't like it. I didn't realise at the time, but looking back I can see I was trying to change something called the Overton window, which is just the basic background to which all political discussions take place. There's the group of things that are just accepted. So I was trying to shift that towards people who want to walk and cycle. Science and reason is the best way to tackle your problems. If you have a big problem to resolve, you need to research it, think it over, maybe sit in the woods and contemplate the full wonder of the universe. If you're a police officer, you can't always do that. It turns out, if you want to try and keep law and order in the town on a Friday night, surrounded by drunk people, the drunks don't always want to wait around for you to deliberate what's best to do. So the police are encouraged to use their common sense, to be confident, and really keep control of difficult situations through the force of personality. Authorised to use violence, they always seem to walk with a bit of a swagger. I must admit, the town's normally busier than this on a Friday night, but apparently there's some sort of bug going round. So anyway, to be fair to the police, they always had the best, or quite often they had the best ideas. In fact, one idea kept us going for a year when we didn't know what else to do. But without science, they were always limited. Here's an example of what I mean. Sometimes you see speed indication devices on lampposts. They stay there for a couple of weeks. They do record the traffic speeds. There's a benefit to the council in that way, to see how fast people are driving. But the number one reason to put them up there is to try and encourage people to drive more slowly. Now, what effect do you think a speed indication device on a lamppost would have on average traffic speeds going past them? If you were driving along, would it affect your driving? Would it make you slow down? Well, the Transport Research Laboratory have looked into it, and they say in the first week you get an average speed reduction of 1.3 miles an hour. Doesn't sound very much. The second week you do get some benefit, but much less. The third and fourth weeks, forget about it. Well, this was discussed at a public meeting. The police thought speed indication devices on lampposts was a brilliant idea. They thought all the roads they could put them on. They predicted great reductions in the average speed. The public liked them as well. I pointed out the results of the research. Both the police and the public doubted the research. In fact, they got quite angry with me for just bringing it up. But remember, we don't live in a world of science, we live in a world of politics. I noticed that if I was discussing something with a police officer who had a degree, then they might not agree with my point, but they would accept the general principle of science, and that was a good way to research things, although they might still prefer their own opinions. Whereas if a police officer didn't have a degree, they didn't get it at all, and it was much harder work to get them to accept anything. And in fact, the police realised that themselves, and from this year, every new person recruited to a police force has to either have a degree already, or they have to commit to studying for a degree, and in some parts of America that's happening as well. After 2 years, it was even more obvious we weren't having any effect, so I wrote to the inspector who's in charge of SpeedWatch for the whole county, and she replied saying, "The roads are so busy, there's no way we could ever have any effect on speeding." Well, this was a bit of a surprise, because do you remember? Right at the very beginning, all the way through the 2 years, the police had told us we should expect to reduce speeding to the actual speed limit. So at the following public meeting, in front of the great and the good of the town, I pointed this out to the police. All the times they hadn't been straight with us, all the times they hadn't responded to dangerous driving. Things got quite lively. You can really only do something like that once. Well, in a world of science and reason, it doesn't matter who says something, how often they say it, or how many people say it. 2 + 2 = 4, whether you like it or not. But this isn't a world of science, this is a world of politics. And so the police decided to punish me. And in my case, at least, they decided to use physical violence. One day, at a SpeedWatch session, 2 police officers came up to me, shook my hand as normal. This road has a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. 2 officers came up to me and shook my hand as usual. This time, they both squeezed my hand as hard as they could. They must have worked out beforehand. It really hurt, but I wasn't going to tell the police that. It is often better to feign ignorance of an act than to take vengeance for it. Injuries from the more powerful must be borne not merely with submission, but even with a cheerful countenance. They will repeat the offence if they are convinced that they have succeeded once. Well, if I'd been following Martin Luther King's guidelines, I should have been winning the police over, shouldn't I? Not competing with them and being assaulted. Though I remember a key aspect of his ideas that I'd forgotten. Even if you try and use a scientific argument to win someone over, it's still an argument. If you win, they're going to be defeated, possibly humiliated. Do you remember that key aspect of nonviolence? Not to try and defeat or humiliate the opponent. The police don't like to be defeated. Certainly they don't like being humiliated. The ingredient I'd forgotten was love. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. I'm not a religious person, but I think that's one of the most important passages from the Bible. And when it used the word love, it's a very particular type of love. Matthew and the other early Christian writers used the word agape, which is the ancient Greek word for the unconditional love that God has for his children. The unconditional love is all about kindness, patience, altruism. I should have been using that to appeal to the humanity of the police rather than trying to win arguments with them. I was going to make a list of all the properties of agape, of unconditional love, but then I remembered St. Paul had done it already and he'd done a much better job of it. It's the ideal type of love if you're protesting. Love suffers long and is kind. It doesn't behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil. It rejoices in the truth, endures all things, and above all, love never fails.
We all have to love each other. We have to change. Please, can everybody try to change more and faster? And can we all raise our hands and wave to the police and say we love them and we love each other and we're all very grateful to be here. Thank you very much.
Seneca, writing about the same time as the early Christians, wrote something very similar. Do as the gods. They begin to give benefits to those who know them not, and persist in giving them to those who are ungrateful. Persistent goodness wins over bad people, and no one is so hard-hearted and hostile to kindly treatment as to not love a good person even while they wrong them. It is evident that the greatest reward for an action lies in the deed itself, for souls are flooded with its beauty, and marvelling at the brilliance and splendour of it are transported with enchantment. For human life is founded on kindness and concord, and is bound into an alliance for common help by mutual love.
You because non-violence requires some degree of confrontation, but of course that's done without any violence. So we've got this beautiful line here where the police are standing and there are activists sitting down, and that's a live, dynamic area where we're holding a beautiful non-violent tension.
So as Martin Luther King said, let's tackle our opponents with love instead. It will make us more kindly if we remember the benefit we once received from the person who now provokes our anger, and let their kindness atone for the offence. So we've all been helped by the police at one time or other, or at least we know someone who's been helped by the police. Let us also bear in mind how much approval we shall gain from a reputation for forbearance. How many have been made friends through forgiveness? What is more splendid than to exchange anger for friendship? Does someone get angry? On the contrary, challenge them with kindness. Remember, someone's perception of something is much more important than what it is. So I shall now look back at the police using Matthew's section from the Bible, love your enemies, pray for those who curse you, do good to those, and the other ones as well, which I've forgotten temporarily.
We love you. We're doing this for your children. We love you. We're doing this for your children.
The thing I love about the police is their leadership and teamwork. It's the bread and butter of what they do, and they're brilliant at it. The young police officers are so keen. The older policemen remind me of benevolent sports teachers, manly and encouraging. They know the value of a kind word. If you follow any of them on Twitter, they spend all their time encouraging and congratulating each other. I like the police, at least when they weren't trying to break my fingers. I met one of them in the supermarket a little while ago and we spoke to each other quite warmly. Like any good police officer on duty, he was buying donuts. They have such a difficult job to do. I bumped into one once in the bicycle shed and told him of my plans to walk the Camino. He said, I'd love to do that. He seemed so tired. They have such a difficult job to do. If you've ever tried on one of those stab-proof vests they wear, they're surprisingly heavy. Pray for them. They have such a difficult job to do. Pray for them. So far so good, but remember, a key point of Agape, of unconditional love, is it's unconditional. I read out some nice things about the police, we think nice thoughts about them, but if we're going to have unconditional love for them or anyone else, it has to be unconditional. So I'm going to read out some extracts from a report that was made about an Extinction Rebellion protest in October 2019, and it's about how the police behaved. You have to remember that these reports are all one-sided, they're all from the protesters, and it's quite possible, quite likely, the police would have a different view of what happened. But just for the sake of trying out our unconditional love, I think these examples will be fine. So let's see if we can keep calm, and to help us, I shall use some Stoic principles. 7th of October, 11 AM, Trafalgar Square. Right index finger violently snapped by a police officer whilst I was helping to hold steady a scaffolding tower that other rebels had rolled into the road. Is it just me, or do the police like crushing people's fingers? I don't think they mean anything by it. I think it's just their way of saying hello. Pressure points being used disproportionately. I witness officers pulling a gentleman from arm tube inside a green gazebo at the centre of our site. One officer was using pressure points and shouting for him to release. I think there were several witnesses, including an ex-Metropolitan Police Sergeant, who said that excessive force was used. But look round. He said he would complain against the police on my behalf. I may have misunderstood something, but isn't using pain to get someone to do something that you want a form of torture? Then think of all the brave people who have conquered pain, of those who did not cease to smile, though that very smile so enraged the torturers they tried upon him every instrument of their cruelty. You may tell me now whatever you like, limbs so twisted that the joints protrude in different directions, yet worse than these are the stake, the rack and the hot plates. Nevertheless, there have been people who have not uttered a moan amid these tortures. Removal of lock-on causing severe burns, which the police gave no medical attention whilst in their care. We do not deny that it is an unpleasant thing to be beaten and hit. It certainly is unpleasant to lose some bodily member, but we deny that all such things are injuries. Mucius put his hand into the fire. It is painful to be burned, but how much more painful to inflict such suffering on oneself. See how much keener the brave are to lay hold of danger than the cruel are to inflict it. It's quite an arduous philosophy, Stoicism, isn't it? But still, let's keep going. Harassment of female arrestee. I was put into handcuffs and went floppy, and so several policemen carried me. One of them grabbed my arse in order to carry me. I had to shout several times until he let go. Then another policeman started playing with my hair as he was talking to me. I told him to stop and he did. I realise this next bit I'm on thin ice because I'm a man, in case you haven't noticed, and I'm going to say something about how a man treated a woman. But anyway, this is what Seneca wrote, so let's try it out. Let us make a distinction between injury and insult. The former is by its nature more serious, the latter is a slighter matter, serious only to the thin-skinned, for people are not harmed but angered by it. Yet such is the weakness and vanity of some people's minds that there are those who think that nothing is more bitter. No wise person can receive either injury or insult. After a police shift changed, at approximately midnight, the police approach changed. The officers told us we would not be arrested until 5 a.m, but they also told us they would actively not let us sleep. They then proceeded en masse to harass, mock, taunt and laugh at us openly and incessantly. We felt shocked at the cruelty of their behaviour and humiliated for a sustained period of hours. Persistent goodness wins over bad people, and no one is so hard-hearted and hostile to kindly treatment as not to love a good person even while they wrong them. The assaults of adversity do not weaken the spirit of a brave person. They always maintain their poise, for virtue is mightier than all external things. Hang on a minute. You're lecturing us on how to put up with torture and to show unconditional love still, where the only thing that's happened to you is you've had your hand squeezed a couple of times. That is true. I have never been tortured, and I got quite cross just having my hand crushed. But here are some people who have been tortured, and they responded in the most remarkable way to their torturers. Okay, here's the first one. This is Murat Kurnaz. He ended up in Guantanamo Bay. On one occasion, soldiers woke Kurnaz every 1 or 2 hours to change cages, forced him to stand or kneel 24 hours a day, and deprived him of sleep for 3 weeks. Towards the end, he was semi-conscious and unable to walk. They had to drag him from cage to cage. He was put in solitary confinement in a refrigerator and subjected to hypothermia. He was caged in a container in the Cuban sun, and in a small airtight box over hours and days he slowly suffocated. He was starved or force-fed, subjected to sexual humiliation and beaten constantly. What makes the story all the more remarkable was the United States government and the German government knew there wasn't any evidence against him in 2002, so they had no reason to suspect he was a terrorist. But instead of releasing him, they kept him for another 4 years because it was politically inconvenient to let him go. So, we're testing out our unconditional love. How would you respond to your torturers? Well, this is what Kurnaz did, and here he is, he's speaking in public in Germany, where he lives. To a packed audience of mixed students of different beliefs or none, he said that his Muslim faith alone had enabled him to survive. He refused to blame his guards or his torturers. He explained how, on his release, he had given his jailers his home address in Germany for the day when the burden of what they had done became too heavy for them. Just extraordinary, and it's not a one-off. Here's another one. Here is Musembeg, who's a British Muslim. Here he is with his American guard from Guantanamo Bay in a restaurant in Britain, and this is what Mossam said. Ex-soldier who guarded me in Gitmo just stayed with me and met my family. This time I had the keys. Can you imagine how they could do that? It's incredible, isn't it? You know, to be so concerned about your torturers that they might not be at peace in the future, they might have remorse and you might want to help them. Or to bring your torturers home to meet your wife and family, for them to stay in your house. Obviously, as a Stoic, I'm not emotionally moved by these things, but it's pretty incredible, isn't it? So, can you see the impact of non-violence when Seneca wrote that souls are flooded by its beauty and transported with enchantment? This is what he means, isn't it? It's quite powerful stuff. So anyway, back to Martin Luther King. He realised his life was in danger. For example, even if he was just going to fly in an airplane, that plane had to be guarded all night, had to be thoroughly searched the next day. His house was firebombed. He realised things weren't looking good. He still kept to his principles of non-violence and unconditional love. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Such a courageous, beautiful man. And he did the impossible. He changed society. I'm not at that level, not quite, but I do try my best. I respect the role you're playing. For human life is founded on kindness and concord, and is bound into an alliance for common help by mutual love.
We got all the power.